Do you know the difference between the Japanese fashion, Fairy Kei and Jojifuku? These are two subcultures that are frequently confused with each other by people that are outside of them. So let's talk a little bit about what makes each one what it is and the differences. Fairy Kei, meaning fairy type, is believed to have been created sometime in the early 2000s accidentally by Tabuchi, the owner of the store called Spank. In order for a cohort to be considered Fairy Kei, it needs to have a proper balance of the following components: silhouette, texture/layers, details/motifs, and colors. The most common Fairy Kei silhouette you'll see is triangular, with the bottoms being wider than the top, like this.
Wow!
You will frequently see people wearing many different layers and textures of fabric, and motifs will typically be yumekawa or vintage 80s and 90s. Accessories will typically be well balanced with the cohort, and Fairy Kei has a very strict pastel color palette with colors that are bright or too muted, only being allowed in small amounts if they're balanced properly. Jojifuku translates to girls' clothing and started becoming a fashion somewhere in the mid 2010s. An article from Kara magazine in 2017 says that the style was started by Twitter hashtags. The most popular Jojifuku brands are ones like Mezzo Piano, Angel Blue, Daisy Lovers, and several others that are all Japanese children's clothing brands from the Heisei era. Japan categorizes its eras by who the emperor is, and the Heisei era lasted from 1989 to 2019. You might hear people refer to the Heisei era as somewhat equivalent to our Y2K, so you can sort of think of these as the Japanese version of our Limited to, Delia's, Justice, etc. These brands rose to popularity in the mid-2010s due to the original target demographic now being adults and being able to afford these brands that they yearned for as children. Jojifuku tends to have a color palette that leans into pastel, however seeing brighter colors is very common, and the color palette is not really strict in any way. There is no set silhouette, as the motifs and brands are the main focus of this style. So, I cannot talk about Jojifuku without bringing up some of the controversy. In its short life, it has been embroiled in a couple of different controversies. The Twitter account that popularized the hashtag mentioned earlier, Otono na noni Jojifuku kiteru, or even though I'm an adult, I wear girls' clothes, states in its bio that this includes both elements of wearing cute fashion and fed fish elements. When looking up this hashtag in Japanese, which I do not recommend anyone do, there is a large portion of inappropriate content that will pop up. I will not be getting into that any further on here. The hashtag has been removed from Instagram. No one knows 100% why, but there is speculation that it is because of these inappropriate themes that are associated with the hashtag. Using the term Jojifuku to refer to this fashion is not very common in Japan, and you can't find entries for Jojifuku on Tokyo Fashion, which will typically have some entries for established J-fashions. Cybergirl cites in a YouTube video she made on Jojifuku that a friend of hers from Japan says it's not common to see adults dressing from head to toe in kids' clothing, and the only use of the aforementioned hashtag is for weirdos to find weird stuff. However, she said people do incorporate some kids' clothing, usually a piece or two, such as Mezzo Piano or Angel Blue, into their cohorts. Her friend did say that some people do wear head to toe kids' clothing, and she personally refers to it as heisei joshi style, and I have heard other people say that it might be best to refer to Jojifuku as heisei retro. Other big controversies surrounding Jojifuku is the encouragement by some of the community members to engage in ED culture. Due to the majority of the clothing brands being used in this style, catering towards children and only going up to a size 160 centimeters, which is usually worn by girls of about 13-14. This is only a subset of the community though, and definitely not the whole thing, so please don't interpret it that way. Lastly, regarding controversy, this is something I haven't really seen other people refer to as a controversy yet, so I will be raising that flag. But I have seen in a few different places people saying that Jojifuku is an evolution of Fairy Kei. This is not true. I believe that this confusion comes from the fact that Fairy Kei is associated with 80s childhood motifs, and Jojifuku is associated with early 2000s childhood motifs. However, nearly all of the sought-after Fairy Kei pieces are from adult-catered brands, whereas Jojifuku specifically emphasizes children's clothing brands. And although there does tend to be an emphasis on 80s motifs, it's not specifically limited to childhood motifs from the 80s, while Jojifuku has a strict emphasis on characters and clothing that was specifically made and catered towards children. So if someone makes a card and it doesn't have any like Jojifuku brands or anything like that, it probably wouldn't be considered Jojifuku. Whereas you can make a Fairy Kei card with no childhood motifs or like 80s motifs, and brand isn't like as important in Fairy Kei. The other factor I believe led to this is the heavy use of pastels in Jojifuku. As we already discussed, Fairy Kei has a very strict pastel color palette, and Jojifuku tends to have more like poppy colors in it, and there's no like outlawing of red or anything like that. This segues nicely into what the other differences are. Aside from the motifs and color palette, Fairy Kei tends to have a triangular silhouette, and the majority of clothing items you will see are very loose, whereas Jojifuku has no specific silhouette, and seeing tight-fitting clothing is very common. Fairy Kei also has an emphasis on textures, while with Jojifuku, that's not really like an important part of the fashion. I also want to take a moment to say I totally am fine with adults wearing kid-size clothing. I myself have multiple kid-size items that I like because they're the right length on me, whereas adult clothing tends to be too long on me, like pants. I am in no way condemning people for wearing children's clothing or liking things that are traditionally considered childish. These are just what the differences are. If you have any other Fairy Kei or J fashion questions, feel free to leave them below. I am happy to answer as always. Now that you made it through this crash course, let me know.